April 10, 1943. Somewhere over the vast Pacific Ocean, Captain Kenji Takahashi sat in the cockpit of his Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber, his hand steady on the controls as the aircraft sliced through the clouds. Below, the endless blue of the ocean stretched to the horizon. Despite the calm exterior, Takahashi's thoughts were turbulent. The Imperial Japanese Navy had long been a formidable force in the Pacific, and they had always prided themselves on their superiority. They believed their air superiority was unquestionable, and their defenses were impenetrable. However, there was one thing they had underestimated: the B-29 Superfortress, a new American aircraft that had recently entered service. Japanese officers, confident in their own technological advancements, dismissed the B-29 as a mere curiosity, a slow, cumbersome aircraft that would pose no threat. They saw it as an ineffective weapon, incapable of challenging the might of Japan's air forces or penetrating their advanced defenses. "There's no way they can outmatch us," Takahashi overheard one officer say during a recent strategy meeting. "That bomber is too big, too slow. We've faced far superior planes." Such remarks had been common. The Imperial Japanese High Command was convinced that no American aircraft could match the power and skill of their own fighters and bombers. The B-29 was seen as an overhyped contraption, just another weapon to add to the list of things they could easily counter. But what they didn't understand, what they had failed to see, was how this slow bomber was a master of long-range, high-altitude precision bombing, a strategy that would change the entire course of the war. Takahashi was too focused on the mission at hand to fully comprehend how close the B-29 was to becoming a game-changer. His bomber, the Betty, was equipped to fight the old-fashioned way, with close-range dogfights and ground attack. But the Americans were about to rewrite the rules of engagement. The B-29 had been designed with one specific purpose in mind: to strike from unimaginable heights, beyond the reach of Japan's best interceptors, and to unleash destruction with surgical precision. What Takahashi and his comrades couldn't foresee was that the B-29 would soon prove the Japanese officers wrong, not just in a single attack, but by becoming the spearhead of an entirely new strategy that would force Japan to reconsider everything they thought they knew about warfare. March 9, 1945. 30,000 feet above the Pacific, the Enola Gay, piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, soared through the sky like a deadly specter. The crew aboard this American B-29 Superfortress had one mission: to destroy Tokyo, the heart of Japan's empire, in a way the Japanese never imagined possible. As the aircraft climbed, Tibbets and his crew prepared for the unimaginable, an attack that would not only mark a shift in the war, but would also shatter the Japanese myth of invulnerability. Below them, the city of Tokyo, so long a symbol of Japan's strength, lay unsuspecting, unaware that its fate was about to be sealed by the very aircraft the Japanese had dismissed as a non-threat. The Japanese had made a grave mistake by underestimating the B-29's capability. While they had assumed the bombers were too slow and vulnerable, the reality was that the B-29's ability to reach high altitudes, above the range of most Japanese interceptors, gave it an almost untouchable advantage. It wasn't just the sheer size of the aircraft that made it formidable. It was the technology, the precision, and the strategic thought behind it. Tibbets knew the mission was dangerous, but as the Enola Gay flew over Tokyo, the crew was focused on one singular goal: dropping their payload with deadly accuracy. The bomb they carried was unlike any before it. With the flick of a switch, the bomb was released, and its destructive power unleashed upon the unsuspecting city below. What followed was nothing short of catastrophic. The Japanese had no defense against the B-29's precise bombing capability. The firebombing that began that night set Tokyo ablaze. The intense heat from the burning city spread with incredible speed, engulfing everything in its path. Japan's defenses were overwhelmed, both on the ground and in the sky. The B-29s had penetrated the heart of Japan, and nothing was left to stop them. For the Japanese military, This attack was a wake-up call. They had dismissed the B-29 as a mere nuisance, but now they faced a new kind of warfare, one they were not equipped to handle. As Tibbets and his crew watched from above, they knew that this was just the beginning of what would be a sustained and brutal campaign that would cripple Japan's war effort. The destruction was just the first sign of a much larger shift. The B-29 had proven itself to be the true weapon of the future, and the Japanese were beginning to understand that their former confidence was nothing more than a facade. The war had changed. March 10, 1945. Tokyo was no longer a symbol of strength. It was a smoldering ruin. The firestorm that followed the B-29 raids had devastated the city, wiping out entire neighborhoods and leaving tens of thousands dead in its wake. The night had been a nightmare for the Japanese civilians and soldiers alike. On the ground, Lieutenant Hiroshi Sato stumbled through the smoky streets, his uniform singed and his face covered in ash. As he looked around, the scale of destruction was incomprehensible. Buildings that had once been tall and proud were now nothing more than charred skeletons, crumbling under the heat. The sky itself was thick with black smoke, and the smell of burning flesh and wood lingered in the air. Sato had been stationed in Tokyo for years. He had seen the city grow, seen its strength, but now all of it was gone. He had heard the officers mock the B-29s, heard them dismiss the Americans as incapable of penetrating Japan's defenses. But as he gazed at the ruins of the city, the truth was undeniable. The B-29 had changed everything. As the firestorm raged on, Sato and others did what they could to help the injured and evacuate survivors. But it was clear that the damage was irreparable. More than 100,000 people had been killed in just one night. The B-29s, with their high-altitude capabilities and powerful payloads, had wreaked havoc on the city in a way that no one had ever anticipated. The raid on Tokyo had shown Japan's military leaders a sobering reality. They were no longer in control. The B-29, the very aircraft they had mocked, had unleashed a new form of warfare that they could neither counter nor escape. For the first time, the Japanese were on the defensive, and the war was no longer just about military might. It was about survival. The psychological toll was just as severe. The Japanese population, once so sure of their dominance, now found themselves facing the terrifying prospect of total destruction. With the B-29s returning day after day, the hope that had once fueled Japan's war effort began to fade. The empire was crumbling, and it was no longer a matter of if they would lose the war, but when. As the weeks and months passed after the firebombing of Tokyo, the true impact of the B-29 raids became clear. Japan's ability to defend itself, both on the ground and in the air, was severely crippled. The B-29s, with their relentless raids, had broken the back of the Japanese war machine. By now, the Japanese military was scrambling to recover, but the Superfortress had shown them that no defensive strategy would be enough to stop the Americans. Their cities were vulnerable, their economy was shattered. The B-29s had not only destroyed key military and industrial targets, but they had also crushed the morale of the Japanese people. The American bombing campaign continued to escalate, and Japan's once impenetrable defenses were now a hollow shell. The shift in power was undeniable. Japan's leadership, once confident in their superiority, was now facing a new kind of threat, a threat they had no answer for. By the time the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the firebombing raids had already dealt a fatal blow to Japan's war effort. The firebombing raids had proven that the B-29 was not just a bomber, it was a harbinger of the end. The officers who had once mocked the B-29 now had to come to terms with the consequences of their arrogance. The weapon they had so casually dismissed had turned the tide of the Pacific War, and Japan's fate was sealed. The B-29, once seen as a novelty, had become the symbol of America's unstoppable might. The Japanese Empire, once proud and powerful, was now reduced to ashes.